This is the toolkit entry that you need to go ahead and copy down into your toolkit on the next blank page. You're just going to want to write down as the title, finding a percent of the number. Pause this video until you have it written down, and that way we can follow along. The question that you're going to answer is, what number is 32% of 8? There are 3 different parts that we know and 1 part that we don't. We know, in this case, we know the part, we know the percent, we know the whole, we do not know the part. According to the percent proportion, we're going to set it up as is over of equals percent over 100. I write it backwards from Mrs. Carmichael, and that's okay. I just do is over of equals percent over 100. The important part here is to know that part represents the is part of the sentence, and the of, or my whole, is my denominator. These sentences lend themselves nicely to filling out all the different parts. We're going to focus on, first, I want you identifying the part with the percent sign. Percent always means out of 100. That's why this P is over 100. And the percent is the easiest number to locate in the sentence because it's got a percent sign. Once I eliminate that and write it as 32 over 100, I can focus on the other number that's listed. And it says of 8. Well, of represents my whole number, which is why 8 is written in my denominator. And then the word what represents something that we don't know quite yet. What number is 32% of 8? So of 8, we're looking for the part here. We're looking for the portion of 8 that represents 32%. When we have 2 equivalent ratios set up just like we do here, this is called a proportion. And I believe you learned the method to solve this last year. We haven't quite talked about it this year. I want to make sure that we understand. This is called cross multiplying, or how I fondly call it Billy Bob Joe the butterfly. And what you do is you circle the cross factors, and you're going to do 100 times x, which is 100x, and then 32 times 8, which equals 256. Notice my equal sign still stays in the middle. I can go ahead and divide by 100, and the lucky thing is whenever I divide by 100, I'm moving that decimal over 2 places. My answer would be 2 56/100. There's a lot of work that goes into setting up a percent proportion. Sometimes it's beneficial, but sometimes the percent equation allows you to arrive at the same answer much quicker. The only thing here is that in percent proportion, we used percent as a ratio out of 100. In the equation, we're using percent as a decimal. It's always going to follow this format. The percent of the whole will give you your part. We've already identified what my part and my whole are. Now my percent is 32%, but I'm going to write it as a decimal, so 32/100. My whole is 8, so I'm looking for what is 32% of 8. Take those 2 numbers, multiply them together, and you get 2 56/100. Like I said, it doesn't matter to me which one you choose, as long as you're comfortable with one or the other. I may ask you specifically on some of your homework problems to use both or to use one. Follow those directions so that you get practice using different ways of solving the same problem. However, if it doesn't specify which way to use, it's up to you. Today's lesson is learning about how to use those skills and techniques to actually solve a problem that involves a percent. In 6-3, we are going to be finding percent in 2 different ways, using the percent proportion, which is over of equals percent over 100, and the percent equation. It doesn't matter to me which one you choose to use, as long as you use it consistently and accurately. Both of them will give you the correct answer when used properly. But before we get going, to give a brief explanation of the difference between the two. If you have your toolkit out, I would go ahead and open it up and fill this out in your toolkit entry. If you do not have your toolkit out, I would pause the video and go grab it real quick. You should have your notes open to 6.3, and you're going to copy down the work that we show here. We're going to solve a couple problems, and these problems we're going to show solved both different methods to make sure that we're given each equal practice. Method 1, we're going to use the percent proportion, focusing on is over of equals percent over 100. Go ahead and write that down. You can use the percent over 100 equals is over of. It doesn't matter. This is just is over of equals percent over 100 is how I've always taught it. I apologize for the messed up font. I don't know what was going on here. My Mac, I had a glitch on one of the fonts that was installed and I still haven't fixed it. So I apologize for that. But this says what percent of 64 is 16. And then we have what percent. We have 3 pieces of information that we have. One of them we know, 2 of them we don't, and then we have this 100 that's always in the bottom right hand corner. The first strategy is to locate the number with the percent sign because that always goes over 100. But since I don't have a number with a percent, X is going to go on top of 100. That's actually what we're trying to find. Then I need to figure out what's my part, what's my whole. Remember the whole goes on the bottom, or the of goes on the bottom. And then the part goes on the top, or in the numerator. If I'm thinking about of 64 and is 16, 16 is going to be my part, or my is, and you'll see that denoted with the keyword is. And then you have 64 representing of, or the whole. To solve this, we're going to go ahead and cross multiply to where I get 64x equals 16 times 100 is 1,600. This is just a one-step equation, so I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 64. And I get 25 when I'm done. So x is equal to 25. Now the only thing here is this is a percent that we were finding, so you need to make sure that you tack on that percent sign when it's all said and done. Method 2 is asking me to use my percent equation. Just make sure that when you write that percent in your equation that you're using the decimal form, not the ratio form. I'm going to go ahead and write down the whole equation, percent times whole equals part. I don't know my percent, so percent is going to remain a variable, and x times the whole. So 64 was my whole, and the part was 16. So if x times 64, 64 times x, to undo that, I'm going to divide both sides by 64. There's 1 out, and I'm left with x equals 16 divided by 64 is 25 hundredths. Now remember, you're finding the percent, and in this case, percent is in the equation in the form of a decimal. So we have to move that decimal 2 places over, and my answer is still 25%. I want you to try this question on your own. What percent of 200 is 150? I want you to try using both methods, using the percent proportion on method 1, so is over of equals percent over 100. And over here I want you to use the equation, which is percent times whole equals part. Pause the video and go ahead and solve it on your own. All right, for the percent proportion, I'm going to identify the different parts that I have. I have what percent? I have of 200 is 150. Looking for the number with the percent sign, I don't see that I have it in my sentence, so that means x is going to go over 100. Is the part, of is the whole. I'm looking for is 150. That goes in my numerator. Denominator will be 200. Going ahead and cross multiply. 200x equals 1,000. What would that be? 15,000. Divide both sides by 200. 150 divided by 2 is 75, but I'm thinking of percent. So this would be 75%. Now moving over to method 2, still finding my percent, so that's going to be an x. The whole is 200 equals the part of 150. Divide both sides by 200. Then I get x equals 15 out of 20, which is 75 hundredths. Move that decimal over, and you get 75%. The last question here in example 2 is a story problem where it's asking us to figure out that how many of the students are women. So a state university in Florida has 29,820 students. Approximately 60 of the students are women. How many of the students are women? First of all, let's go ahead and write a what is statement. So what is 60% of 29,820? This is the question that we're going to need to answer and ask ourselves. I'm going to go ahead and pick that I'm going to use the percent equation. Typically, I choose the proportion, but I'm going to challenge myself to try something I'm not necessarily as comfortable with. And I'm going to remember that it's percent times whole equals the part. I have 60% of something. So the of part represents my whole number, and then the 60% represents the percent, but you need to make sure that you write it as a decimal. When I plug in 60%, it'll be 0.6. The whole is 29,820 equals the part. So finding the answer to this is as easy as figuring out what is 6/10 of 29,820. That would be 17,892 is the missing part that we're trying to find. But the conclusion is where we're actually writing a sentence that answers the question. So it says how many of the students are women? You would say there are 17,892 female students. Great. Okay, so once you're done with this, go ahead and pause the video or stop the video. Make sure you have your notes, and you need to open up your textbook to the assignment that's written up on the board. Good luck.